Hello and welcome back to our daily devotional. We've been going through the book A View from the Zoo by Gary Richmond. He worked in the LA Zoo during the 60s and 70s, and today's chapter is called The Intervention, and it comes with a picture. All right, let's get started. I couldn't say that I hadn't been warned. I had been, and by the most respected keeper at the zoo. He had walked right up to me 2 months before and said, "Richmond, anybody tell you about that kudu?" A kudu is an extremely large 600-pound antelope with horns that spiral 36 inches above its head. It is tan and white with soft vertical stripes on its muscular sides. The females are more delicate and have no horns. "No, Jack," I responded. "Is there something I should know?" "Be careful," he said matter-of-factly. Then he walked back to his section. No one knew more about the African hoofstock than Jack Bedall. He had been given that Marlin Perkins Award for his amazing accomplishments with hoofstock. So if he said that I should be careful, then careful I would be. I did a little research and discovered that the male kudu becomes sexually mature at 2 years. Our male had just reached that milestone. Smaller 60-pound antelope can become a bit dangerous during breeding season, but a 600-pound greater kudu could be lethal. Even lions avoided such an animal. I began to watch and noticed some very subtle changes. First, the kudu began to withdraw from human contact. Then he took to sharpening his horns on the granite walls of his compound. I watched him carefully, knowing of his potential. When I worked his section, I would arrive at the zoo at 4:45 a.m. and check my animals. If anything happened during the night, I wanted to be the one who discovered it. If everything checked out, I would spend the next hour reading the golf course clubhouse adjacent to the zoo, and then begin my 6 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. schedule. I'll never forget a June morning in 1968. I was an hour before sunrise and very foggy. The zoo is eerie when it's dark and downright scary when the fog is draping the streetlights and muffling the sounds. I walked by the impala and noticed that they were standing with their ears cocked toward the kudu barn. Henry, the saddle-billed stork, was pacing. Normally he would be on one leg asleep. Something was up. I hurried my pace. When I reached the kudus, my heart was gripped with terror. The male was viciously attacking the females. Unless I was successful in separating them, the females would be killed. I knew what was happening. In the wild, the females would be giving off a scent which attracts and provokes the males. The males would fight each other for days, and when the strongest emerged, they would claim the females, and mating would begin. In a zoo, there are no extra males to fight, and the females are not ready to mate. The male became enraged when the females rejected him, and they became the recipients of his wrath. They were in their right quarters, a small 40 by 40 foot corral adjacent to where they were put on public display during the day. It was the largest yard in the zoo. I thought the females might live if I was successful in letting them out so they could avoid him. The problem was that in order to let them out, I had to enter and walk completely across the small corral. The male didn't look as if he wanted company, but something had to be done now. I grabbed a rake and a shovel and placed them in a wheelbarrow. I unlocked the gate and stepped into the corral. Everything became still, and it seemed as if I had entered a bad dream. The male stared at me and shook his head in a challenge. I whistled Amazing Grace and began to back across the corral. He stalked me like a cat stalks a mouse. His eyes were full of rage. I finally reached the other side and fumbled for the lock. I turned the key, keeping one eye on the enraged male who was standing 15 feet in front of me. It clicked and I slid it out of the hasp. The male charged. I could see the finely sharpened tips of the horn headed for my chest. I threw myself against the gate. It gave way and I fell backwards. There was a brown blur, a sickening thud, and a mournful cry. A female had run for the gate and taken my blow. I scrambled up the chain link gate and cast myself out of the exhibit. I landed on my back 7 feet below on a thick bed of ivy where, for several seconds, I pondered the question, am I alive? My heart was pounding and I was soaking wet. I took those to be good signs. After 30 minutes of intense efforts, I was able to separate the male from the females. He was locked in a barn for 2 weeks and let out when the females were ready for him. Both females gave birth several months later. One of them always wore a scar where the male gored her as he attempted to kill me. Her saving my life had not been intentional, but I always gave her special treatment after that. I loved her for it. It occurred to me that this was not the first time someone had taken punishment for me. It had happened before, only on that occasion my Savior had known exactly what he was doing and what it would mean. Isaiah 53:5 says, "But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed." Have you thanked Jesus lately? Perhaps it's time you did. All right, that concludes our devotion for the day. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe leave a comment down below about maybe about how Jesus has protected you in the past.